Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Giovanna Scorsone. I'm the Education and Public Engagement Manager here at the Aga Khan Museum. I'm so pleased to welcome you here today as we welcome Dr. Farhad Daftary, who will share with us the history of the Fatimid dynasty's imam caliphs and the spiritual foundations of this pluralistic society. Our mission at the Aga Khan Museum is to connect cultures through art, and through art to promote pluralism and understanding. Our most recent exhibition, The World of the Fatimids, brings attention to a period of time when people of different cultures and religions lived and worked together in harmony, using their knowledge and skills to contribute to a shared society under Fatimid leadership. Through the spectacular and rare art pieces on display, which we are so fortunate to have on loan to us from museums from all over the world, we can see evidence of Muslims, Christians, and Jews not only living side by side, but interacting and working together and making beautiful art for each other. I hope you've had the chance to see the exhibit upstairs, but if not, you'll have an opportunity after the talk, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy visiting with a deeper understanding of the important spiritual foundations and inclusive cultural history of the Fatimids. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge this land on which the Aga Khan Museum sits, known as Takaronto, and honor the stewardship, past, present, and future, of the Huron-Wendat, the Iroquois Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you to our speaker, Dr. Farhad Daftary. Dr. Daftary completed his early and secondary education in Tehran, Rome, and London before going to Washington, D.C. in 1958. He received his BA and MA degrees from the American University in Washington, and then continued his graduate studies at the University of California, Berkeley, leading to a PhD degree in 1971. Subsequently, Dr. Daftary held different teaching posts, and since 1988, he has been affiliated with the Institute of Ismaili Studies, London, where he is currently co-director and head of the Department of Academic Research and Publications. Most recently, he has also been a core contributor to the Aga Khan Museum's forthcoming publication, The World of the Fatimids, which will be available in the coming weeks. We are so happy to welcome Dr. Daftary to Toronto to share his knowledge with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Daftary to the podium.
Thank you, Giovanna. And I would also like to thank Henry Kim and his colleagues here who made this event possible. I've had a very bad cold, so I try to cope with it. Now, my talk today is related to the spiritual foundations of the Fatimids. The Fatimids, as you know, founded a major new caliphate in the year 909 in a remote corner of the Islamic world, in North Africa, in the region of Afriqiya, which covered actually today's Tunisia and eastern Algeria. They ruled for 262 years, a fairly long period, first from North Africa, and then in the second phase of their rule and caliphate, after they had conquered Egypt and founded the city of Cairo, which became their capital. That was in 969. 4 years later, the fifth Fatimid Caliph Al-Mu'izz transferred the seat of the Fatimid state from Afriqiya to Cairo. The Fatimids were also city builders. In addition to Cairo, they founded 2 more capital cities while they were still ruling from North Africa. The first one was Al-Mahdiya, named after the founder of the Fatimid Caliphate, Abdullah al-Mahdi. And the second one was Mansuriya, which was founded by the third Fatimid Caliph, Al-Mansur. The Fatimids also patronized arts and sciences and learning in general. They founded a number of academic institutions of learning, like Al-Azhar, which started as a mosque but was soon turned into a major institution of learning. And they also founded, the Darul Ilm, or the House of Knowledge, by the Fatimid Caliph Al-Hakim in the year 1005, which became really a major, academy. They founded massive libraries, including the one house, the Darul Ilm, which possessed, we are told, more than 400,000 manuscripts. Fatimids were also extremely tolerant by any standard towards all other religious and ethnic communities, and that's why we see Sunnis and even non-Muslims rise to high positions under the Fatimids. They engaged in trade and commerce, both with East, particularly with India and Europe. All in all, then one would say that the Fatimids really created a major state, which soon grew into an empire, and they actually surpassed the Abbasid Caliphate. And Cairo, in its heyday, was much more significant than Baghdad, that was the capital of the Abbasids. My talk today refers to the spiritual foundations. That has to do with the fact that the Fatimids had dual identity. They were not only heads of state, rulers, and caliphs, but also the spiritual leaders, teachers and guides, or more appropriately, imams of the Ismailis, a very significant Shia Muslim community. Now, it is this aspect of the Fatimids which I would like to dwell upon a bit now. And to do that and to fully understand in its Shia sense the role of the Fatimid caliphs as the imams of the Ismailis, we need to backtrack to earlier periods, because this entire office or institution of the imamat was rooted in earlier teachings and development and history, in fact, of the early Shia Muslims. That will take us back to the succession dispute on the death of the Prophet in the year 632. As we know, we had the historical caliphate, which meant that a number of eminent companions of the Prophet, starting with Abu Bakr, Omar, and Osman, were in various ways elected or selected to rule as caliphs, the first caliphs in Islam. But from early on, there was this other group comprised of friends and companions of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet, married to his daughter Fatima. And this is the root of the name that later the Fatimids adopted for their dynasty because they traced their descent to Fatima, the Prophet's daughter. They believed that Ali was better qualified than any other companion of the Prophet to succeed him. Of course, not as a Nabi or Prophet, because the Prophet himself had said that he was the seal of the Prophets, the Khatam al-Anbiya, but as the leader of the Ummah, the nascent Muslim community. And Ali himself believed in the legitimacy of this claim based on his kinship to the Prophet, his knowledge of the Quran, and the Islamic teachings. The Shia further believed that the Prophet himself, when returning from his final Hajj, the pilgrimage, at a point along the route between Mecca and Medina known as Qadir Khum, had actually appointed Ali to be as his wasi, his legatee, and his successor under divine command. It's also important to realize that the Shia from early on, although part of these ideas probably evolved and developed over time, but from early on it seems that they held to a specific conception of religious authority, because they believed that the message of Islam and its teachings had emanated from sources and contained truths hidden in that message which could not be attained and accessed by human reason. And for that, there had to be a spiritual leader, teacher, or guide, or imam, as the Shia have preferred to call their guide. And this guide had to come from the Prophet's own family, from the clan of Banu Hashim, or the so-called people of the house, the Ahlul Bayt. Only the members of the Ahlul Bayt provided the channel through which the complete message of Islam, both in its external and internal senses, could be explained. And this, of course, set the Shia apart from the rest of the community, who later became designated as the Sunni, and the partisans of Ali in time became known as Shiatul Ali, or as the Shia. The Shia, and as of course we know, Ali succeeded to the caliphate only as the fourth amongst the early caliphs, and he was murdered after a brief period in the year 661, but the Shia actually survived this event, and after Ali in succession recognized his sons by Fatima, Hassan, and then Hussein as their imam, until the time of Imam al-Hussein, who was, martyred in Iraq at Karbala, as we know, in the year 680. The Shia represented a unified community, mostly of Arab origins. But after the events of the Karbala, by that time, the various branches of Ali's household and family, the Ali's, had grown. So the Shia themselves split into a number of groups, sects, or firaq, each one sort of developing its own views and following and Ali as their imam. At this time, one of the main communities was the so-called Imami Shia community. They traced their imamat through Imam Hussein's sole surviving son, Ali, and then his son, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, and then his son, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. It was in the time of Imam al-Sadiq that the Imami Shia became the most important early Shia community with a distinct, identity, mainly due to the teachings of Imam Baqir and more so of Imam al-Sadiq. It was at the time of this Imam that the doctrine of the Imamat, the common heritage of the 12 Shi'is and the Ismaili Shi'is, the common early heritage, was articulated. And this doctrine remained the central teaching of the Ismaili community through the Fatimid and later times. This doctrine was based on the assumption of the permanent need of mankind for a divinely appointed and protected imam after the Prophet, and after Ali, who was designated by the Prophet himself, as I mentioned, after Ali, the line of the imams would continue in the progeny of Ali, especially through his younger of the two Fatimid sons, Imam al-Hussein. This Imam was in possession of a special knowledge or ilm, and he would be appointed by the Nas, or the explicit designation of the previous Imam. This Imam was the sole legitimate authoritative teacher of men in all their spiritual affairs. And at any one time, there could not be more than one such Imam. And this Imam was the proof of God, the Hujjatullah fil Ars, the proof of God on earth. And the earth would never be left without such an Imam. And we have also a hadith from Imam al-Sadiq that held that even if two men were left on the face of the earth, one of them would be the Imam. So this concept of the Imam of the time, and the fact that he was the sole person qualified to interpret his religion and to explain the teachings of Islam and the Quran and the commandments and prohibitions of the Sharia, this doctrine was inherited by the Fatimids. And it provided really the frame within which the spiritual foundations of the Fatimids were based. When Imam al-Sadiq died in the year 765, his succession was again disputed, and the Imami Shi'is, who were his followers, split into a number of groups or factions. One eventually became known as the Isna Sharia, or the 12 Shia, and another one who acknowledged the imamat of Ismail after Imam al-Sadiq, and they became known as the Ismailiya or the Ismailis. This group of Shia Imamis traced their imamat after Imam al-Sadiq and Ismail through latter son Muhammad, and then a number of hidden imams, 3 hidden imams who were very crucial in the early history of the Ismaili community, because these were the imams who, of course, made every effort to hide their true identity but at the same time, they managed to organize a very dynamic revolutionary movement against the Sunni Abbasids, who, like the Umayyads before them, were regarded as the usurpers of the rights of Ali and allied to the leadership of the community. These imams founded their movement, which was actually referred to as Adawa al-Hadiya, the rightly guiding mission, or simply as Adawa, the mission. And the religio-political message of this mission was spread by a network of da'is or missionaries, very successfully, I must say. So by around 870s, these da'is were active in almost every major region of the Islamic world, from North Africa all the way to Yemen, southern Iraq, Iran, and Central Asia, and a bit later on in South Asia, starting with the region of Sindh. The early success of the Ismaili Dawah, which was under the leadership of the Ismaili Imam of the time, who had his secret central headquarters towards the end at the city of Salamiyya in Syria, this led to the creation of state. The success of the Ismaili Dawah led to the creation of a Fatimid Dola state. And the grounds for that had been laid by one of the major early da'is, Abu Abdullah al-Shi'i, in North Africa. He had been active there for almost 20 years amongst the local, Berbers, especially from the Confederation of Kotama, and he actually organized the Kotama Berbers into a well-disciplined army, and this army, in fact, served as the backbone of the Fatimid armies for many, many years to come. And the Imam of the time, Abdullah al-Mahdi, meanwhile, had gone from Salamiyya in the year 902 to Egypt and then to the city of Sejel, which is situated in today's southern Morocco. And then by 909, when Abu Abdullah al-Shi'i had managed to defeat the Aqlabids, who had ruled over that part of North Africa on behalf of the Abbasids, al-Mahdi entered the capital city of the region, known, as I said, as Afriqiya, the city of Qayrawan, and it was now heralded that leadership had reverted back to the Ahlul Bayt, to the people of the house. Now, this was a major success, not only for the Ismailis, who now for the first time possessed a state of their own, a major state of their own, but also for the Shia in general, who not since the time of Ali himself had a state. This, of course, did not sit well with the Sunni world in general and the Abbasid caliphs, because now the Fatimid caliphs, who were in fact the Ismaili imams, could present their own Shi'i challenge to the Sunni Abbasids. And a challenge that was only perceived, I would say potentially, in the year 909 had become actualized. The Fatimid Caliph imams, because they were imams and caliphs, we often refer to them as caliph imams or imam caliphs, did not abandon their universal aspirations on assuming power in North Africa. They aimed to spread their rule over the entire Ummah and beyond, and therefore they maintained their Da'wah organization. Although initially, while they were ruling from North Africa, they had to confront a number of internal and external problems and difficulties posed by the Umayyads of Spain, the Abbasids, the Byzantines, and perhaps above all, also the inhabitants of North Africa, who were strongly anti-Shi'i because Shi'ism had never had any deep roots in North Africa. Even when the Fatimids began to rule, the Shi'is remained a minority. The bulk of the people of North Africa, the Berbers, belong to various factions of Khariji, Islam, and the Arab people of the towns of Afriqiya were all Sunni, mainly belonging to the Maliki school of law. It was the fourth Fatimid Caliph, Imam al-Mu'izz, who started his rule from 953, who finally managed to consolidate Fatimid rule in North Africa, and then launched a campaign of conquest, which had been one of the objectives of the Fatimids from the beginning, and successfully managed to seize Egypt in the year 969. The commander of this expedition, of course, was the well-known Johar. Egypt was conquered. The city of Cairo was founded a few kilometers to the north of Fustat, the old capital of Egypt. And al-Mu'izz himself, 4 years later, in 973, arrived in Cairo, and that signified the transference of the seat of the Fatimid state from North Africa to Egypt. It was al-Mu'izz who now, for the first time, began to pay particular attention to da'wah activities. He revived the da'wah organization, which had remained more or less inactive in the North African phase of the Fatimid Caliphate. And under his leadership, Cairo became the center of a very complex, elaborate da'wah organization. The Imam, who was the Fatimid Caliph, was the supreme leader of this da'wah. He was in charge of all the major policies of the da'wah, and in fact, it was due to his spiritual office that he interpreted the law, he interpreted even the Quran. In fact, the Fatimid sources refer to the Fatimid Ismaili Caliph Imam as the speaking Quran, because he's the one who gives life to the text of the Quran through his ta'wil and other explanations. Now, what is significant to note at this juncture is that the da'wah was active both within the Fatimid state, which by that time actually covered all of North Africa, Egypt, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, part of Palestine, and also a bit later Syria, a very extensive empire. The da'wah was active both within and outside of the Fatimid state. As I said, the Imam, the Fatimid Caliph, was the supreme head of this da'wah organization, and he had a hierarchy of people working under him. Next came the chief da'i, or bab, or da'i or du'at, and then a number of others. The world, and most probably the world outside of the Fatimid state, was divided into 12 regions or jaziras. Each one was placed under the charge of a learned chief da'i known as the Hujjah, and he had da'is and assistant da'is known as ma'azooms working under him. The important point now is that, although the Fatimid, Caliph imams were also the imams of the Ismailis, and Ismailism was the official religion of the Fatimid state, the Ismaili community remained a minority within Egypt. In fact, the Shia continued to remain a minority. The Fatimids never believed in forced, conversion or imposing, Ismailism on their subjects. In Egypt, for instance, the bulk of the subjects continue to be Sunni, mainly of the Shafi'i mazhab, with a very significant community of Christian Copts. It was, however, outside of the Fatimid states, oddly enough, where the Ismailis were more often than not actually persecuted, that the Ismaili Dawah had its greatest and most lasting success. Why? Because these regions were already familiar with a variety of Shi'i traditions. Isna Asharis, Ismaili, and also Zaydi. So during the course of this Fatimid period, due to the activities of the da'is outside of the Fatimid state, many Ismaili communities sprang up, all acknowledging the Fatimid Caliph also as the rightful imam of the time, as the, in fact, the sole authoritative spiritual teacher. These activities reached their peak by the time of the 8th Fatimid Caliph Imam al-Mustansir. Many learned da'is, we do have their names, hailing from various parts of the eastern sections of the Muslim world, the so-called Iranian world, da'is like al-Nasafi, Razi, al-Sijistani, al-Kermani, al-Mayyid fi din al-Shirazi, and last but not least, Nasir al-Khosrow. They also, elaborated a number of intellectual traditions, including the so-called tradition of philosophical theology. They use various philosophical traditions, including Neoplatonism, in expressing, in maximizing the intellectual appeal of their theological message, because at the time in those regions they were addressing the message to the elite and to the educated strata of the society. So by the time of al-Mustansir, who died in 1094, the Fatimids were still had their spiritual authority both within, but much more so outside of the Fatimid state, which had actually prepared the ground for, I would say, for survival of Ismailism after the downfall of the Fatimid Caliphate and dynasty in the year 1171. It was due to the spiritual foundations of the Fatimids and the activities of their da'is and the success of their mission, especially outside of the domains of their state, that Ismailism managed to survive the demise of the Fatimid Caliphate in its two forms, mainly meaning in the Tayyibi and the Nizari forms. And as we know, on the death of Imam al-Mustansir, the Ismailis, they again faced a succession dispute and split into two groups, one following al-Mustali, and later you see Fatimids as the imams. And later on they found their stronghold in Yemen and then in India, where they became known as Boras, and the other branch acknowledging the rights of the original heir designate of al-Mustansir, Nizar, and tracing their imamat in the progeny of Nizar, who founded another state centered at the fortress of Alamut, which actually was there for 166 years until it was actually uprooted by the Mongols in 1256. To sum up, I would say the Fatimid caliphs, by contrast to other caliphs like the Umayyads of Spain or the Abbasids or the early Umayyads, were also in possession of this spiritual office, the office of imamat, which served them, which brought them followers outside of their state, people who were not subjects of the Fatimid state, but they acknowledged the Fatimid caliph as the rightful imam of the time, and they followed his teachings and guidance. And that good tradition has continued through the Nizari line of imams down to our time, whereas the present Agha Khan, the founder of this museum, is actually the 49th hereditary imam in that unbroken chain of spiritual leaders of the Ismaili. So all of that came about and was made possible by the fact that the Fatimid caliphs were also had this dual identity of being also Ismaili imams, and their mandate as imams made it possible for the Ismaili Shia community to survive the downfall of the Fatimid state, because soon after the uprooting of the Fatimids in 1171 by Saladin, Ismailism actually disappeared almost completely from Egypt, but it went on. It survived in Iran, in Central Asia, in South Asia, in Yemen, and later in India. Thank you for listening.
So thank you once again for coming and sharing your afternoon with us today. I'd like to let you know about some upcoming lectures. Our next free lunchtime lecture is on April 12th, and we have Dr. Ulrika Alhamis talking to us about Meet the Fatimids, so more on this very interesting dynasty, and she'll be talking to us from an art historical perspective and highlighting some of the pieces that are in the show upstairs. And then later in May, we have Dr. Heba Mostafa, who is at the University of Toronto, and she will actually be connecting the Fatimid dynasty with some of the more ancient Egyptian traditions and the veneration of the Nile. So I encourage you to look on our website and come out for these lectures, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Enjoy your day.